Well, thank you everybody for joining today. We have a fast and furious 30 minutes together to really reflect on some of the terms that you see on your screen here. So looking at culturally responsive teaching and practices, and also how that connects to activating critical consciousness for students to really create an authentic learning experience for them. So a little bit about me. I'm Ashley Goldstein, well now Hart, I should have changed that. Got married recently amidst COVID. I'm the main solution architect. So my solution architect role, what is that? So I work with districts across Maine and teachers like yourselves to uncover curriculum challenges, content challenges, and needs in the now, but also needs that I can support in terms of creating programmatic changes for the future. And my counterpart, Steph Cantor, she's not on the call today, I don't think, and I apologize, Steph, if I overlooked you. So she is in charge of Maine partnerships across Maine. So we're your main team. Previously, I was a humanities curriculum coordinator for grades 6 through 12 in a public school district here in Massachusetts. And prior to that, I had been in the classroom. So definitely happy to share some thoughts with you today and some insights and hear from you all. And hopefully you leave with an understanding of how culturally responsive practices can really engage and empower students to activate that element of critical consciousness through their learning processes, and then also leave with some tangibles. So being able to really find the content, but also the strategies that will get you going and make the work digestible, but also actionable. Because sometimes when we hear those two terms, it's like, whoa, where do I even begin? Like, that sounds heavy. So hopefully I give you a place to begin and then you can carry it forward after today. So I am going to leave this slide up for just a moment, and I would love for you all in the chat to give this question a thought. So how do culturally responsive practices engage students and activate critical consciousness in the classroom? So that's a pretty complex question. So I'm going to dwindle it down to focus on culturally responsive practices. What does that mean to you all? And this is definitely a formative check. I will be that person that says no right answer, just kind of do a quick think and ink. So think and jot in the chat. So I'll give you a second to kind of center your brain and to share that. Oh, and you know what? I want to, okay, I am recording. Phew. Culturally responsive teaching. What does that mean to you? Yeah, inviting Deb, thanks for sharing that. Inviting students to share their own cultural responses and pieces of their identity in the classroom. Yeah, seeing themselves in the content that's taught. So providing that mirror and emphasizing that there's not just one story or perspective. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm seeing a trend here. So that connection. Yeah. Creating connections to their lives, encouraging them. Love that. Shanna? No.
Shauna, but that's okay. That's
Shauna.
okay.
No, I'll get it by the end, Sean. No, I love that because the other parts to that of really encouraging, I love that word, encouraging the students to think and learn and creating a space where they can do that. They feel empowered to go deeper. Mirrors, windows, sliding glass doors. Thanks for sharing that, everybody. I think so. I will give you an A for that. Susan, thanks. Understanding the culture of your students and including all in our classroom. Yep. Hey, I got the AP group here. So many of the things you said in the chat are really reminiscent of this framework I just want to share with you. It's a way to really think about culturally responsive teaching and how much of that, like you noted in the chat, is grounded in culture and identity. And it's really our culture and identity that often informs us in a way that activates our emotions. So we become more motivated and engaged. So that's that continuum. But I also like to pose the opposite side of things. When culture is not brought into the classroom, how that deactivates our emotions, makes us unmotivated, and disengages us. And when we talk about culture, there's so many aspects to that. What a rich word. And we'll spend a little bit of time unpacking that today. We won't do it justice. I'll just be candid about that. But in planning lessons and planning units, just really thinking about how are we activating students' emotions and getting them really excited and engaged with the content that we bring, but also the modes that we're providing for them to engage in the content and show what they know. So here is one of my favorite authors, and you may have read this text. If you haven't, I definitely encourage you to. So Zaretta Hammond here. So just to level set, providing really a definition of culturally responsive teaching. This probably hits on some of the things, and it does, that you shared in the chat. So it's really your ability, so the educator's ability to recognize students' cultural displays of learning and meaning making, and then responding positively and constructively with teaching moves or practices that use that cultural knowledge as a scaffold to connect students to what they already know to new concepts and content. So I want to pause there. That's like a very heavy like part of the quote. So what I'd love for you to do is just kind of reread what I just said and provide initial reactions in the chat. What's drawing you in just in that first part that I read. So that ability to recognize students' cultural displays of learning. So you can just share a quick jot. You can share a question that comes to mind. I know there's like a couple of questions that come to mind for me in terms of the complexity of this work. Curious to hear how you're thinking about that. Yeah, Deb, it demands that we know our students beyond a body. How are we creating spaces to get to know our students and providing that connective tissue to the way that we present information so they can process it. Yeah, not a disadvantage, but diversity of experiences as an advantage and something that can be channeled to engage students. And I love this because it's midway through the year, a little beyond for some, right? So a lot of times as teachers and practitioners at the beginning of the year is right when we do the get to know yous and things like that, like those activities that in orientation, I used to do it myself. But then, sometimes, and to no one's fault, kind of moving away from that in the middle of the year towards the end, because other pressures take over. And talk about pressures this year, thinking of just the modes in which people are teaching, that adds a whole other layer. So perhaps today is that opportunity to kind of recenter and say, hey, in a future lesson, how can I infuse that in activating that self-awareness, self-concept within my students? The other piece of the quote that I think is super important going into just the next slide is that the educator really has that understanding of the importance of being in a relationship with students and having that social emotional connection to students to create that safe space for learning at the beginning of the year and then on a continuum. And you all know that because you're in the classroom, especially now, that social emotional learning piece. Our kids are going through a lot for sure. So this slide right here, super intense looking, but just a couple quick takeaways. I recommend that you definitely check out Zaretta Hammond, her book, if you haven't already, but we're not going to focus on all of the quadrants here. It's not to say that I'm placing more importance on some of the quadrants over the others, but we only have, 18 minutes left today. So there's only so much we can do. So definitely don't feel like you have to be the expert yet. But some of the things within these bottom two quadrants here. So information processing and then creating that community of learners. Those are things that you can apply in the now. So I believe somebody had said earlier, I think it was Deb, the mirrors and windows, being able to connect content to culturally relevant examples and metaphors from students' community and everyday lives, really creating that mirror to engage them. That would be a way to get students to process new information and make connections to new concepts that you're trying to bring to the table in class. The other piece within the information processing quadrant that I'll just point you to is just thinking about the mode in which we're asking students to access content. So are we providing students with authentic opportunities? Love to have a future conversation on how we define the word authentic, but authentic opportunities to process content. You know, we're giving them agency and choice in terms of how they can access the content, process it, and then show what they know. And then the other things that I'll just point out in this quadrant about the community of learners is that for these things in the information processing box to happen, you really have to have that community of learners. So having really created space where students feel empowered to use their voice and make a choice for themselves, and also provided really some routines and protocols to support that culture of learning. So there's a lot to these quadrants, but I'll just point out to you, kind of think of information processing and community of learners as the lens in which to grab onto when we do a little planning in a moment. Does that make sense? Thinking of activating that community of learners, creating space by the ways that we plan for the classroom. And then also be thinking about the how, you know, how are we asking students to process information in a way that truly motivates them, taps into their cultural identities, and activates that motivation. So this is a lot of theory. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit in the interest of time to critical consciousness. So, and provide you with an example of how this all weaves together, right? So if you're familiar at all, in the chat, can you share, have you heard of this philosopher? Have you studied a little bit about critical consciousness? That'll help me to figure out what I should share and what I shouldn't. No shame. Love it. This is a great quote to bring back to your colleagues too, to really have just an open discussion about it. But if we look at Paulo Freire, in his 1975 work, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, he coined the term critical consciousness. So this is one piece from that larger work, but he says education either functions as an instrument which is used to facilitate integration of the younger generation into the logic of the present system and bring about conformity, or it becomes the practice of freedom, the means by which men and women deal critically and creatively with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of their world. Love to hear, that's a complex quote, but love to hear initial reactions to that. Like where have you seen education functioning as more of an instrument for conformity rather than encouraging freedom, critical thinking, creativity, and transformation? What are the downfalls of that? I could guess at a few. I'm using that teacher wait time. So something to think about. And in terms of challenging some of those constructs, Paulo, he coined the term critical consciousness in 1970. he did a lot of research around the way in which oppressed populations learn and the opportunities that they are not given by the social constructs that surround them. So when we say activating critical consciousness, what we're meaning is, are we giving students the opportunity to analyze, navigate, and challenge the oppressive social forces that shape their lives and communities? Are we doing that? And how are we doing that with the content and the planning and the lessons that we bring into the classroom and the spaces we create to do that work? And it's not just living in that a sense of, despair, but it's channeling that. Once you recognize these oppressive systems and structures, really identifying ways to circumvent the obstacles and challenge these social forces. And, when we talk about civic engagement, there it is. We want students to be able to activate something within themselves and then put it into action to challenge a system of oppression, just to get them to view their world in a different way. And that's something that I will say, Paulo Freire, when in his work, he really talked about how it was essential for oppressed people to be able to read the word so they could read the world. And I love that. And I think that if anything, if you grab onto that phrase for our next and last phase of our time together today, let that sit with you. How can I provide space for students to read the word so they can read the world and perhaps read the world differently than they do now? So you're probably wondering, okay, great. Awesome, Ashley. How does this apply to my classroom? So I'll invite you, if you haven't already, please go to your Newsella account. If you have a paid subscription, awesome. Dive right into that account. If you have a free account, everything I show you today, including the model that I'll show you of a text set, you'll be able to use that content and access the text set and all the content in it that I provide just with your free account. So a couple of things I just want to give kudos to. We have a partnership here at Newsella with Better Lesson. So this partnership has really allowed us to create and design frameworks for teaching, including this one that I will share with you right now, but I'll also share it with you after our time together today. So essentially, this is a critical consciousness reflection tool. That's the best way to describe this lesson. And the part of it that I'm going to bring your attention to, there's a lot here, right? There's professional learning. This is a great extension for after our time today. But the piece that I'm going to call your attention to is this part here. So there's a set of reflective questions. And I use that term set loosely because look, there's a lot of different terms there, or questions and bullet points there. So what I ended up doing for you all is, and I shared the slide deck earlier on in the chat so you can access this document, is I ended up putting together an interactive document. I'll ask you to make a copy. So really saying, okay, now, Ashley, I understand some of the theory, great, but how do I put this into practice when I'm thinking about a lesson I'm about to teach tomorrow or next week? So this is a really great tool that I adapted from the Better Lesson link that I just shared with you. Once you make a copy of it, you'll be able to edit it. So it's hard to do everything.
I'm sorry, could you just put the link in the chat again?
Yeah.
I don't have it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Here, I'll share the whole slide deck so you can have it as well. And this is for everybody. I can drop that in the chat. You got it. And let me know for some reason if you can't access it. I have done that before, right? Everybody has. You don't unlock the shared setting. So when you access the deck on slide 14, you can access an interactive document and it'll force you to make a copy. A little trick, if you're ever looking to make a link that forces folks to make a copy. Just change that little word edit at the end of the URL to copy. And there you go. So once you get there, this document is yours. So the challenge is really to do a couple of things. One, think about a future unit or lesson, and consider the questions that are listed below. As I mentioned, it's a lot. Look, I think there's like 12 bullet points there. So what I'd encourage you to do is take a moment now and read through those bullet points, but choose only a few. I recommend 2 to center your mind and center your planning and center your lesson. You can't do it all. And if you can, I'm jealous. But just take a moment and highlight just a couple of the bullet points that you're like, I really feel like I have an upcoming unit I could do that. Where I could ask students to disrupt issues of power, examine privilege in their communities. I want to focus on letting students activate their sense of agency and using content as a tool or a lens for the world. So take a second and do that now. And as you do that, I'm going to just slide back over to my slide deck here. And just pop over to this slide. So part of today, we have 4 minutes left, but I want to leave you with some actionable items. So what I'm going to do is actually use this link, which you'll be able to use as well, just to show you an exemplar of what this could look like in action. But I also want to spend a little bit of time quickly, and I swear I can do it. It's just showing you on Newsela. So even the free version, you have access to a huge repository of content. So current events that are leveled at 5 different reading levels. We have a huge archive at this point. As you'll get to know when you start searching for specific content, and every single current event is leveled at 5 different reading levels. About 1/3 of them are also offered in Spanish as well at 5 different reading levels. So to find the content that I need, and I did this earlier, you can type in a term. Maybe you want to pull one from one of the questions that you asked: power, privilege, injustice, looking at oppression. There is a lot of different words that can activate and at least give you a good starting point to start curating some of the content. So once you find some content that you want and you want to dive into a little more deeply and maybe craft a whole unit around, it's very well possible. What you can do is access the content by clicking, but then start building your own text set. So then you're creating a curation and collection of content, oftentimes in service of activating student agency, providing a mirror window that you then can continue adding to. And then you can adapt the text set to include, you have no character limit here, thank goodness. I hate when that happens, to include specific supports that you then can outline here for your students and also for your colleagues. So the last piece that I want to show you is just the example of the text set that I gave you access to. So the putting into practice and kind of pulling this all together based on our very quick journey today, I curated this text set on questioning systems and structures to enact change. So really, I pulled these questions in bold right from that document that I had shared with you with all those bullet points. So I was like, I can't do it all. I want to do 3 bullet points, and I want to ground my planning in those 3 bullet points. So what I ended up doing was I curated or started to curate a text set. I will continue to add to this, but I really want my students thinking about how they can use their sense of agency to choose content that they want to read about in order to oftentimes reshape their perception of the world. So I have some additional supports and strategies here. I love the 4 A's protocol. So if you haven't heard of it, please check it out. A big part of this for me was to provide space for my students to have a dialogue. So I think it was Deb, someone said they taught current events. And it was really discussion based, and that's important for me. I want my students to be able to have a civil discourse about really complex topics in the classroom. So I created a space that they could do that. And then lastly, and it's still a work in progress, but I definitely want to consider the how, how am I assessing my students? How am I creating space for them to demonstrate what they value and what they know and how their perspective has changed based on this lesson or unit. I wanted to make sure you also had like an inspiration as well. Where does SEL come in? So prior to this lesson, I would have spent some time enacting this lesson here, looking at an identity wheel and having my students fill that out and share, parts of their public and private identities and how that might inform the ways that they then are engaging with the text. So here's the kicker. If you like this and you're like, wow, and I'm not saying you have to love it, but if you want to kind of play with it and like interact with it and edit it, the link that I gave you will allow you to make a copy of it and make it your own so you can use it on your account. Or perhaps you have your own ideas, which I'm sure you do. You can go back to the CRT lens and kind of choose the specific bullet points based on your readiness and also your knowledge of an upcoming lesson and start there. So I wanted to make sure you left with a starting place and hopefully some ideas and key takeaways where you feel equipped to at least start, and make the leap in terms of taking on this framework and really trying to apply it to your practice. In the slide deck, you may have already noticed, I have those live links for you, but I also want to encourage you, I put some additional resources there for you. And then an additional slide on the 4A's protocol. So if you're looking for, there's probably something you're doing tomorrow that you could apply it to. But it's a really great start to build students' critical thinking and inquiry when it comes to complex text, but often in the service of, bridging their identity to what you're doing in class. So I know we're over time, so thanks for sticking with me. I'll stay on for a second. If you have questions, I'm sure you do, even if they're kind of rhetorical right now. I did put my information here and also my colleague, Steph Cantor, her information here. I love doing this stuff. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to use my email and reach out to me. If you're looking for an idea or you're kind of stuck, I love the design work and I love to hear from you all because you're the ones that put it into action. So thanks everybody. Hey, fast and furious, 32 minutes. Deb, good for you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Fast and furious is the way to describe that, but hopefully I gave you some food for thought. Good luck, Deb. Bye.
Congratulations, Joe. National Board.
Thanks. Ashley, do you want to grab the recording?
Yes, I will definitely send that to you.
Oops. I meant to end the recording. I was going to ask her a question.
Oh yeah, hold on one second.